True. Let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kanji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chimpy drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the kanji verse.
I'm going to take some time to respond to a lot of the deceptive claims from detractors against the pre-Columbian Africa to America's contact model. Now, many of these individuals are almost programmed like AI bots to repeat a lot of the deceptive statements by Hazek Vieira, Montiana, Barber, and the many individuals in the 1997 Current Anthropology Forum against Sertima, specifically alleging chronological gaps and mishaps. And a lot of them have a extremely deceptive practice of limiting the Africa to Mesoamerica contact model to the 14th century voyage of Abubakari. Now, a careful reading of both Sertima's text and just the surrounding scholarship among Africana scholars reveals that this is absolutely not true. If you look at the compendium of evidence presented, there's a very, very large chronological span that details the different instances in antiquity, especially prehistory, that Africans definitively contacted ancient Mesoamerica, right? Now, when we look at the paleopathological analysis with threadworms, hookworms, the lesser meal beetle, right, and a lot of these different pathogens that are in human stored goods or in the human body themselves, they clearly reveal pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. Even if we deal with, cotton strains such as Gossypium hirsutum or Gossypium gossypoides, or the many different cotton strains found on both sides of the Atlantic, or bottle gourds, right, or Z. maize, which is found in Ile Ife impressions. And onwards, there's numerous different instances showing this prehistorical contact between Africa and ancient Mesoamerica. And this goes back as far as 50,000 BC to 6,000 BC. So the claim that this contact is not met because of the chronological gap is obviously false. Now, another thing to note is that Western scholars are much more comfortable with the idea that, Asians crossed the Pacific Ocean to reach the Americas. They're much more comfortable with this than the African proposition. But interestingly enough, they ignore the fact that Sertima and numerous other Africological scholars mention Australoids and Australians, as well as the Black folk in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, right, who began their voyages to the Americas as early as 25,000 BC and 15,000 BC, respectively. So if we were to look at the Melanesians and the different Black people in Fiji and Oceania and Southeast Asia, some of these Negrito populations who definitively made the voyage to the Americas, and many scholars actually look at the craniometrics of these populations and compare them to Paleo-Americans and find some commonalities. This is one of the principal components of the proposal of Sertima and many of the African-centered scholars who posited Black or African connections with pre-Columbian America, right? So again, this is long before the establishment of the Tutu-Xi civilization or the Olmec civilization. So again, these Black populations would be in ancient America, right? They would have had a settlement or a presence in ancient America and would have contributed to the flowering of later civilizations, such as the Olmec civilization, right? So we're dealing with 50,000 to 6,000 BC. And again, specifically 25,000 BC and 15,000 BC in reference to the Australoids or the Australian Aborigines, the blackfellas, as well as the Southeast African so-called Negritos, right? Now, when we get into the dynastic era, Sertima specifically referenced some connections between the Nile Valley civilizations as well as the civilizations in Mesoamerica, the Tutu-Xi, the Epi-Olmec culture. And scholars deceptively claim that he limited the connection with the Olmecs to Abubakari's 14th century voyage. This is absolutely not true. What he did do is he connected the development of civilizations on both sides of the Atlantic to interconnectedness. And more specifically, when he's dealing with the contacts, particularly the Ramessid era, which is circa 1200 BC, as well as the Nubian dynasty, right? This coincides with the radiocarbon dating of the La Venta ceremonial platform, being in between 800 to 130 BC, right? So there's a peak of contact between 948 and 680 BC, which aligns with the political and cultural dominance of the so-called Nubian 25th dynasty, as well as with the Phoenician period, which is also referenced by Sertima. He speaks about the Phoenician sailors, the Carthaginian sailors, the Garamantes, who had a huge presence across the African continent. So again, the idea that the analysis of Pathet Diang, of Sertima, or any African scholar is limited to the 14th century voyage of Abubakari is absolutely false. We spoke about, the prehistorical evidence, right? Going back as far as 50,000 BC and even further, perhaps, especially if you deal with the paleo-botanical and paleopathological evidence. And again, the Egypto-Nubian and Phoenician contacts, extend from 1200 BC to 680 BC to the 7th century before the Common Era, right? And whether we're dealing with the analysis of Guadarrama, Wyszynski, speaking about the robust prognathism in the Tatilco remains, it's clear that, some of these populations within Mesoamerica had African affinities, right? So the 14th century voyaging by Abubakari basically was built on the precedent that was set from Africans from the Happy River Valley civilization, the Garamanti civilization, right? Some of the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, as well as prehistorical input and prehistorical contact that existed, in deep Paleolithic times, right? So when Abubakari decided to launch his voyage in the 14th century, he had a long history and foundation that was developed not only by these Africans from other cultures, but also West African populations, Mul mariners, if we follow the research of Pathet Diang, who had already made the trip centuries and millennia before, right? And even if we deal with post-Columbian era sightings, right? Vasco Nunes de Balboa, Alfonso Ponce, right? And these different European scholars and explorers, they were able to observe different populations that they defined as Black among the Americas, trading with the Americas, right? So if you examine the video that we did last night with King's Monologue and Tro Black, we examined the myriad of evidence. We go through it, the genetic evidence, Harvard's Allen Ancient DNA Resource, AADR, finding BTM91, right, within pre-Columbian remains in Belize, as well as in the Dominican Republic, before the Columbian period. And then you have the Ancient DNA Explorer, which founded in 9th century Chichen Itza, right? And that's just one of many different pieces of evidence. The epigraphic evidence by scholars like David Kelly and Aaron Kamugisha and MORONS, right? Detailing, Haynes et al., detailing, just the commonalities, the epigraphic commonalities between the Mandinka-related civilizations and the civilizations of Mesoamerica, and on and on and on. But again, it's just clear that this claim of a chronological gap is just fraudulent. A careful reading of the text, a careful reading of Sertima, Diang, Diop, right, Diawara, shows that there is a giant span of contact. This was persistent, multi-generational contact between Africa and ancient America. And the evidence clearly shows this. So don't allow these grifters, these frauds, these deceivers to promote that lie ever again. It's fraudulent, it's not true, and it's been completely debunked. That's all I got for y'all on this. Hope to catch y'all on the next one. Peace.
True, let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirate lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chimpy drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.